Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Poets Corner, or
the Let's Be Happy podcast.
Yes, I'm Delphina and my co-host,
Rosamund Gravel.
And today we have a really special guest with us. I met him in there is a little story that I would like to tell. So when during my first week in London, I was decided to attend some poetry plays, and I found this website, and there was this event called the Goddamn Poetry Jam. So I went there and I met Kid Anansi, and we are delighted to have him on our episode. So Kid Anansi, welcome and thank you for being here. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes. So, my name is Kid Anansi. My friends call me Jamal. I am a poet. I've been writing and performing poetry and taking it seriously for the past 7 odd years. I have then gone on to run my own events. Currently, I run 2 monthly events. So that's that Goddamn Poetry Jam and also Extra Second London. I've also performed at Glastonbury and also various other festivals. And currently I am working with a comedy cabaret troupe to create and put on a 1-hour cabaret show called The Phenomonopoly.
It's amazing. It brings me on to my first question. How did you get up and perform your poetry? I know we both know as writers, we all write poetry, but how did you decide to get up and stand up and decide to do spoken word?
Necessity, definitely. Basically, I had to because I had already been writing, and so when I was younger, when I was around 17, I started writing just funny little poems in my notebook and on my phone, just because it just seemed like an interesting way to just kill time. And I always used to write as well. I used to write short stories in detention, and yeah, one day when I was 17, I wrote a poem. And then I was way too anxious to actually bring it to any open mics or perform it at all. And it wasn't until my friends essentially told me, Jamal, you have to start sharing some of your poems at an open mic. And so, yeah, that summer, it was my second year at uni, I went to Poetry Unplugged, which was at the Poetry Cafe in West London, and I started just performing my poetry over there, and I pretty much got hooked from that point on. And then when I graduated uni, I then started taking it a bit more seriously. So I started going to events like Spoken Word London in Dalston, which had been going on for 7-8 years at the time. And then going there, I then got offered to host occasionally, and so I then started hosting 1 year later, and I just kept building up a repertoire of skills and experience along the way. But it all started in 2015 with an open mic night that my friends forced me, or they basically said you have to do it, because as fun as it was to share my poems in the schoolyard and just during house parties, they were all saying this needs to be a book, this needs to at least be shared in a more poetry setting.
Did you think the first ones you went to, were they kind of do you feel it was the right audience or the right vibe that you liked? Because obviously you've gone on to do your own events and curate those. Were the ones that you went to at the beginning, did you feel that was the right space for you?
At the time, yes. Looking back on it, though, at this point, like future me definitely says that there are better nights I could have gone to, or at least more appropriate nights. But more than that, I would definitely say that um, because of how the community was at the time, where because it was still quite small and everything was still very much based on people going to the event that they just knew about, that they liked. There wasn't really much of a social media presence for it. Um, and so having the first nights I went to being places with more of an online presence, and yeah, going to places with a bit more of an online presence and a bit more advertising, that also meant that I was around a lot more first timers as well. And that was the biggest thing to, give me the confidence I needed. But uh, if I could go back in time, I would have definitely just gone straight to Spoken Word London instead of Poetry Unplugged, because Poetry Unplugged is really great for first timers, but Spoken Word London did so much more to ingratiate me into the community, into the London poetry community. And if I had been able to do that sooner, that would have definitely have been for the better.
Fascinating. And why invited other people now to the stage and invite them to tell them poems and not only being a host?
So because open mics were so important for me at the beginning to get interested in poetry and to continue, that was one of the reasons why I wanted to do open mics and host open mics, just as a way of almost giving back to the community. And then what became interesting was that I realized I was actually really good at hosting. I didn't know necessarily what made me good at hosting in the moment, but because people were feeling a lot more at home and a lot more confident and a lot more supported when I would host, I was like, that's all I need to know. I'm here to give people that confidence boost that I also needed when I was starting out. And also, it has allowed me to really both learn a lot about poetry from, I guess, non-established names, and that way I just really get to focus on the poetry itself. So, for example, I have like a very noticeable ignorance of established names within poetry. So oftentimes when people will mention a famous poet or a well-published poet or a well-known poet, I will basically draw blanks. And it's because all of my favorite poets are people on the open mic circuit. And it's because I've really developed a real love for the people who go to an open mic, who are just regular people who will just go perform and then they'll go to work the next day. I think that plus the community aspect is the thing that really keeps me going.
Do you think that, I know from my experiences writing poetry and trying to get it out there and sense of competitions, and it can be quite a closed world and it can be quite a staged world, or there is a perception that it is one of your passions and driving forces to, as it seems to be, like democratizing it. And as you said, it's sort of, people can set up, you can do it, you can write a poem in the back of a cab and then come to the goddamn poetry jam or go to last month and come and say it. Are you trying to sort of like not shake up the community, but make people be more aware of it so people can get more interest in poetry?
Yes. Basically, yeah. So that the main thing that pushes me is that it does make the scene very equal. Because one thing I noticed, especially since COVID, is that the community has always wanted people to come in and share, but since COVID, one of the most interesting things is that the scene has become a lot more mainstream, and we get a lot more people who may not necessarily want to perform, but they just want to sit and watch. And before COVID, it was more people would come to perform. And so what I find both really interesting, but also, very, very motivational, is the fact that, you're able to have this incredible diversity whilst also, well, what I really like is that both before and after COVID, it's still like the desire has always still been to like bring people in. It's just now the crowd is different. But that doesn't mean the crowd is better or worse. It's just that the crowd is much bigger because a lot more people are noticing poetry. And yeah, I think that having that open mic space that I cultivate and the focus on the open mic really allows for anyone to show up and read. And that's probably one of the biggest things I pride myself on, especially with Poetry Jam, because we've had everyone from local politicians to sex workers to people working in like business, people who are unemployed. There's just such a wide range of people who will come and share their stories. And that's just, that's only gotten bigger ever, like over the last few years.
Would you like to see sort of spoken word or poetry kind of become alive in schools and in universities? I know that when I've written poetry for a long time, but I've also studied it. You study it as a piece of text. Would you feel that you'd like to kind of expand spoken word into basically education? Would you see avenues trying to go into education as a whole to do that with poetry?
Oh yeah. So aside from hosting open mics, I also run workshops for children and young people, because the one thing that made me think that I didn't like poetry was the way it was studied in school. And even though there was still one or two poems that we did study that did inspire me, at the same time, one of the things that people often tell me about my poems is that they do feel like a breath of fresh air because they are mainly used to the poems that they have to study in school. I absolutely want to, help push an alternative form of poetry analysis and poetry appreciation, particularly in schools. And like there are many ways that I think about how to do it. Both just give kids more interesting poems by more contemporary art, by more contemporary writers. That's where you can start. But also, there are new things that I am learning. So, for example, there's a poet called Ocean Vuong who recently did an interview and was talking about how many students who study poetry, or like both in schools and in universities, they really struggle to talk about how it's made them feel, about their views, because there is this social fear of coming across as cringe, especially if something has touched you. So yeah, there is definitely like I definitely feel it like a need. I definitely feel like a very strong need to make sure that poetry can be accessible for young people, so that they can enjoy it in schools, because also, the weird thing is poetry is very difficult to analyze in a scholastic fashion. Like, you can appreciate a poem for what it is, but for example, a lot of my poems are very direct. So there is very little to write an essay on with my poems, because it's just, for example, I have a poem called Diversity Policy about the experience of being the only Black person in the room. And even with the intricacies of that kind of experience, the way it's written is still incredibly direct. It's still like a very piece by piece story. So yeah, I think kids aren't given enough kids aren't given enough variety of what poems are, and they are made to analyze them in too scholastic and too rigid and in too essay like a fashion, when sometimes literally all you need is just for them to be like, I didn't like this poem, or I did kind of like this poem, and here's why. And then just give them a larger supply of poems to the point where they've built enough of a context of poetic knowledge that they can start analyzing. Because one of my biggest issues with analysis, especially literary analysis, is that I hadn't read enough books when I was writing essays about books to be able to really know what I'm talking about when being analytical about the literary devices or the historical context.
Fascinating, and just like it would be such an amazing project for that to happen, because we really need to. Well, I think you can be touched so much by a poem, and then if you don't feel it young, you will just think it's this boring thing. So yeah, it's amazing.
And also, I think that one of the hardest ways to, I think that it gets harder, but there are ways around it, but there are just cultural barriers to it. So, for example, one of the things when I used to teach that was really effective in getting some of the young people and some of the children to get interested was to talk about hip hop and its relationship with poetry. But the tricky thing is you have to find the right hip hop songs that really evoke poetry. And the problem is a lot of people still want to view things like rap and poetry as having to be two separate things. And sometimes they can be, but I'd say hip hop and poetry are very much like similes and metaphors. Like the Venn diagram has a lot of overlap.
For sure. And as I said, you in one sense, sometimes you don't want to go down the path of saying, that they're really similar and it becomes a bit cringe. And then you sort of alienate a sort of section. But if you can connect it properly, it's fantastic. But as you said, it's finding the right balance to do that and elucidate with hip hop and rap.
Yeah.
And when it comes to writing for you, in your case, what do you get inspired by? Or do you set yourself in a place and write, or you go for a walk and some ideas start probably to come up? Or do you have a moment in your day that you sit down and say, okay, now I'm going to write, or all that?
So there's a quote from Anthony Bourdain, and yeah, I'm going to butcher it, but yeah, he talked about like inside of me there is a little gremlin who just wants to smoke weed and watch cartoons and old movies all day, and it is my job to outwit that little demon goblin. And that's kind of how it is with my writing, where I will always have like the ideas and they'll always be swimming around my head, but it will be bringing it to, bringing yourself to like actually put it to paper and flesh out an idea to its fullest. And yeah, the way that I have, and that's basically something I've had to learn. Like, there is, unfortunately, at least in my opinion, no easy route to getting into the habit of writing. So, um, so yeah, one of the things that inspires me the most is pretty much anything. So I'm inspired by anything and everything that I experience. So, for example, one of my most recent poems that I wrote was inspired by um, this idea I had about non-violent direct action um, in the name of trans rights. And I thought that it would be funny rather than talking about violence, talking about anything that would easily just get lost in the online debate hellscape. That I tried something a bit more direct, so that's why I wrote a poem called "Scam Your Local Turf," which basically tells people if you know a transphobe, if you have a local transphobe in your community, scam them, take their money, don't hold them at gunpoint, like pretend to be someone else, commit identity theft, and scam them. And that was like the poem itself. And to write that, I will have what often happens is I'll get the idea in my head, like I'll have 100 ideas a day, but then I will basically allow my brain to let that idea run. And there is a point of letting the idea run. Sometimes I will need to like get a pen and paper and start to write something. But what often happens is if my brain kind of envision an ending, then it's usually going to be a poem. But usually I will realize whilst letting my mind run, if I realize I'm just kind of talking in circles, then perhaps this idea isn't a poem, perhaps it's a conversation, perhaps it's something to bring out during the intro at Poetry Jam, but maybe it's not a poem. Maybe it's even a short story, maybe it's a play. I let anything and everything inspire me because I think that that's also quintus. I also feel like that's the difference between a poet and a novelist. Like a poet can be inspired by anything, and a novelist is a bit more direct in the things that inspire and motivate them to keep them working. Because when you have a novel, it is, even though you can have a novel with lots of different ideas, a novel has a lot more focus with it. And so yeah, I let anything inspire me, and the process by which I write is by just sort of doing a free write in my head and then just letting it reach some kind of conclusion.
Cool. So it's a kind of process where you want to let things out rather than sit down and write about this, and it's going to be like this structure and this rhyme is more like I need to let this out.
Yeah, and with that, a big part of my writing process is also editing. So sometimes I will have something written and it will take even up to a year to edit, because sometimes I will just be changing words here and there. Sometimes I'll have to change the entire structure. And yeah, it will always be about how will this sound when it's performed. So I often think of like the sound itself. So when it comes to things like the actual writing of the poem on the page, that is something I haven't really explored as much, but I know I will eventually once my friends essentially start badgering me to write a book.
Well, I hope they do. I think it'll be a fantastic. Were you surrounded by words? Sort of slightly off key of that. Were you surrounded by words growing up and strong voices?
Kind of, yeah. So my parents are both very opinionated, very outspoken, but not. But neither of them are big readers. And I will admit I am also not the biggest reader. I mainly use audiobooks. But I will also defend the validity of audiobooks till the day I die. Um, but the funny thing is, culturally speaking, so my family hails from Ghana, and the oral tradition of storytelling is actually something that is very endemic to Ghanaian culture. So one of the reasons why I call myself Kid Anansi is because the deity or mythological figure of storytelling is Anansi in West African culture. And with that, I find it very, and yeah, with that, the one thing my parents do inspire me with is definitely my humor. So both my parents have a really strong sense of humor, very, very social people. And that always plays into my writing. So especially when I have like a particularly serious poem in my head, I'll always be like, no, write a few jokes in there, put a few jokes in there. Let's not be too serious.
Really interesting where the words came from and your voice came from, but also that you. I always think that artists and poets are bits of troublemakers. That there's sort of, again, it's like this thing of like poetry's view of like staid people writing staid words. It's actually, I think, to write really good poetry that connects, you have to disrupt a bit, and you have to be a disruptor and like be happy with that kind of role.
Yeah.
And yeah, so it seems that we all follow the tradition in our own ways. But yeah, it's that's the one thing I kind of want to, and you do, so to throw open the doors is to say, actually, it's not just all about the rules or about a certain set of tracks. It's actually, you've got to be willing to say words and things which might disrupt and might make people feel uncomfortable. But it's also interesting what you say, that you put your way and your history, and it sort of put the jokes in there to enliven it up a bit and to sort of leaven it out.
Yeah, and I've also found that it ends up having a better effect on getting the point across. At first it was just because I refused to take myself too seriously, but then whenever I would have poems which with a mix of humor and seriousness, the the actual point of the poem was would come across a lot stronger.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Do you consider humor is important nowadays?
Oh, more than important, I think it's necessary. I think that we can't. I think that humor is a quintessentially human thing. It's not just about laughter, it's about connection. Because if you think about it, some of the things that we will see on TV or see on our phones that make us laugh aren't necessarily funny. They aren't necessarily a why did the chicken cross the road type joke, but they will still make us laugh because we feel a level of connection. We feel like a weird impetus to laugh when we're especially correct about something, or when we are in like very strong agreement with another person. And so, with all of those things taken into account, I feel like, yeah, humor is incredibly powerful. And even if you think about it in a much more morbid and cynical sense, when you think about right wing groups and fascists and basically people who want to oppress, the main way that they function and the way that they operate is by using humor. They use humor to downplay the seriousness of their actions, the seriousness of their homophobia, of their misogyny. They will, like, when you call them out on their BS, they will play it off with a joke. And, you know, like, it's because, and that is just one of the many examples that humor is incredibly powerful. And I am just very fortunate and also very privileged to have been using humor very early on in my writing career. And now it's like just a quintessential part of, like, making people laugh is a quintessential part of what I do. But yeah, I don't think that it is possible to have a revolution without laughter. Because if the revolution is too, because even though the revolution is serious, if you try to be like, the revolution must be so serious that nobody is allowed to laugh at all ever, then you end up doing yourself a disservice, because people are like, well, this is way too serious. I just want to have fun, because, you know, happiness, joy, fun is part of the human experience. That's why we write.
I think I'm probably misquoting. I think, but Maya Angelou said that never trust anybody who can't laugh, or, you know, can't take a joke or can't tell a joke. And I think it's a very, very important thing. And as you said, like, you know, authoritarian regimes always get rid of the comedians. They might start passing. They might make jokes at the beginning, but they don't make jokes about themselves, or can take jokes about themselves. They're usually deeply unjoyful people, I think.
Exactly. And I have really seen the power of humor in my poetry, and also just in how people respond to it. So one of my most popular poems is called How Straight Am I, where I poke fun at toxic masculinity, and also just the very masculine urge to act emotionless, because a lot of dudes feel as though they can't have any feelings, otherwise people will call them gay. And with that, and yeah, I didn't really think much of that poem, because I just thought, oh, this is just a silly poem with some funny jokes. And 7 years since writing it, it is still my most popular piece. And people still, when I go to certain gigs, will still, like, not ask, they will demand it.
That's really interesting. And getting back a bit of what you say about connection, do you think that we as human beings need more connection?
Yeah, I think well, I mean, my biggest conspiracy theory is that governments and oppressive regimes will work to destroy communities and basically make us connect less, so that they can sell us rubbish. And and I've believed that for a long time. It's also one of the reasons why I put so much effort into making Poetry Jam and all the other open mics I run a welcoming space for community, where anyone can feel safe. And it can be tricky to maintain that, but connection is why I do it. But being able to do it, and the how, it always really depends, and sometimes it will be very easy depending on the situation, and sometimes it's hard. But I think the best way to, like, foster connection, I found, is there has to be at least one person in the room willing to be a bit cringe, willing to embarrass themselves a little bit, willing to be a bit vulnerable, because then everyone else will then be a little bit more okay to dip their feet into the pool of discomfort. And also because since like 2019, I have held very closely a really beautiful quote. I can't remember who it's by. I think it might be by Jonathan Franzen, but I'll have to double check. But someone said, if you want the rewards of being loved, you have to submit to the mortifying ordeal of being known. And you have to be willing to know other people and to not judge them, and to embrace that non-judgment, and just say, like, let's just get to know each other. And I think that through poetry, because poetry demands vulnerability, it's a lot easier and a lot more possible.
Yeah, sure.
Absolutely. And would you, in your opinion, would you say that spoken words or places like the Poetry Jam kind of events are growing in popularity in the world or in England?
Yeah, I definitely say that. I think that it's a lot easier. Like, it's weird because attendeeship at a lot of open mics is very up and down, but I know that it's getting bigger because, one, there are a lot of the people who are in attendance, so many of them are new faces. Yeah, just the increase in new attendeeship is a huge plus. And on top of that, another huge plus is that makes it bigger is just that people need this, because a lot of our media isn't conducive to vulnerability. It doesn't really allow us to be completely open and uncomfortable, and like, yeah, just putting ourselves into a really like vulnerable place. It can be like really scary. Yeah, that growth is only going to get bigger.
Hopefully, yeah, I will love it.
So the goddamn Poetry Jam is every third Tuesday, is that right?
Yep, every third Tuesday.
And that's in London. And there is another open mic session. It's the
Extra Second London.
Extra Second London. And that is the last Saturday, very much. And we'll put your handles and social media when this episode comes out, but people can just obviously Google search for them and they'll find how to get to them, how to buy tickets, how to be a part of it on the internet.
Yeah.
And we are getting to the end. Would you like to read some of your poetry?
Yes, absolutely. I'm going to read my most popular one, How Straight Am I? I'm so straight that there are no wardrobes in my house, because I'll die before I cover myself in anything that just came out of the closet. I'm so straight I only shake hands with lesbians. I can't stand to touch a hand that might have touched a dick. That's basically a second-degree hand job. I'm so straight I eat bananas sideways like corn on the cob. I'm so straight I don't give blood to the Red Cross because I'm scared of ending up in another man's erection. I'm so straight that if I'm at a sleepover and the only bed available is a bunk bed, then I will sleep on the floor because I am not a top or a bottom. I'm so straight that as I sleep wearing Spider-Man printed pajamas, I draw dresses on all of them so no one will think I sleep with a bunch of men on top of me. I'm so straight that it gives me BO because I will not touch a man's body in the shower, even my own. I'm so straight I don't wipe my ass when I shit because I'm scared there's a chance I just might like it. I'm so straight that I don't eat popcorn on principle because that's basically a busted nut. I'm so straight that when I make love to my boyfriend and stimulate his prostate, I wait. Because I'm so straight that I'm always miserable. Because to be happy is to be gay. I'm so straight I've developed dysmorphia, training my mind to hate my body so I don't find any man attractive, especially myself. I'm so straight I let it manipulate my mental health, let it manifest into femicidal violence because I envy your strength and your support networks as well. And as a result, I try to ensure your lives are a living hell, all while thinking I'm the first and only bloke to think he can treat people this way. Because imagine how terrible it would be if more men were like me, aggressively perpetuating transphobia and misogyny to downplay their own lacking heterosexuality. Oh, wait. Shit. That happens all the time, doesn't it? Thank you.
That's really funny.
Thank you so much. That was awesome. And if you want to hear more Kid Anansi, make sure to follow him on Insta and also go to those poetry nights. Fantastic.
Thank you so much.
That was fantastic.
So make sure that you follow Kid Anansi. We'll put that information on our website, which will be up and running soon too. And it's been an awesome episode. And don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel.
Yeah, it has been amazing. Thank you so much, Kid Anansi, for being here and spending time with us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rosamund, for another great episode. And thank you to the audience for being there. See you on the next episode of
Poets Corner
or Let's Be Happy podcast. Bye, everybody.
Welcome to Raise Your Voice, the second season of Poets Corner or the Let's Be Happy podcast. Make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on social media.